Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy. Cartographer Margaret Wickens Pearce brings forward the layers of a map that are often overlooked. Her maps depict indigenous relationships and stewardship of the land, and she does this by working closely with indigenous people to visualize things like land-grab universities and Inuit perspectives on the destruction of the cold by outsiders. Pearce, who is a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, is the recipient of myriad grants and awards and is our April Native in the Spotlight. Join us after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Jill Freitas. The Alaska Federation of Natives is speaking out against the proposed federal voting bill it says could create new barriers for Alaska Native voters. In a press release issued April 6th, AFN urged Congress to reject the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, or SAVE Act, which is currently being debated in the U.S. Senate. AFN represents more than 190 tribes, along with Native corporations and nonprofits across Alaska. Leaders say the bill would require voters to present documentary proof of citizenship, such as a passport or birth certificate, in person at a designated election office in order to register for federal elections. For many Alaska Native communities, that could mean traveling long distances, often by plane at significant cost. In a statement, AFN says, quote, "The SAVE Act would disenfranchise eligible voters and recreate the very barriers our communities have fought for decades to dismantle," end quote. The organization also raised concerns about how the bill would treat tribal identification, noting that many IDs do not include citizenship status and would require voters to obtain additional documentation. AFN says the process could take weeks and may be difficult or impossible for some community members. The group argues the legislation is unnecessary, calling it, quote, "a solution in search of a problem," end quote. AFN says the bill would also restrict systems widely used in Alaska, including mail-in and online registration. As the debate continues in Washington, tribal leaders are calling on Congress to focus instead on improving access to voting, particularly in rural communities. A federal judge has rejected a plea agreement in the case of missing Navajo elder Elda Mae Begay. Begay, a 62-year-old member of the Navajo Nation, was last seen in 2021 at her home in Sweetwater, Arizona, and has not been found. According to the Associated Press, the judge denied a proposed deal with Preston Henry Toth, who was accused of assaulting Begay before she disappeared. Prosecutors say the agreement would have allowed Toth to avoid additional prison time. Begay's family opposed the deal in court. Her niece, Seraphine Warren, told the judge, quote, "Accountability is not time served. We still don't have the truth," end quote. Advocates say the case highlights ongoing challenges in addressing missing and murdered Indigenous people across the country. Arizona drivers have lots of specialty license plates to choose from, 114 to be exact. As KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrasio reports, the largest tribe in the Phoenix metro area is among the latest to be featured.
Back in 2023, Republican Representative Teresa Martinez pitched letting the Gila River Indian community design its own plate.
Lots of people will think, oh, this is just another license plate bill. It is a very big deal.
Because for each plate sold, $17 will be donated to the tribe's Transportation Committee for traffic and road improvements. Commuters regularly travel through their reservation just south of Phoenix,
especially when the I-10 is down.
Martinez's proposal passed part of a larger bill that included the neighboring Ak-Chin Indian community and Pasquayaqui tribe. Gila River in March became the fifth of Arizona's 22 federally recognized tribes to print one. For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrasio.
And I'm Jill Freitas.
National Native News is produced by Kawanak Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com.
Hear that? Tribal college faculty do so much, one can't say it all here. Nothing but respect. Visit mostthoroughdjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy, sitting in for Sean Spruce. Cartographer and citizen Potawatomi tribal member Margaret Pearce centers Indigenous people, stories, culture, and memory in her map making. She works with tribes and Native knowledge and culture keepers to bring forth map layers often overlooked by the mainstream. One of her recent projects maps the ways Inuit protect their homelands in northern Canada and how colonization interferes with that connection. In her current project called Mississippi Dialogues, it depicts the Mississippi River through Indigenous perspectives and stewardship. Pearce was recently named a National Geographic 33 last month and is the recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship and Genius Grant, among other awards and honors. She is also our April Native in the Spotlight. You can join our conversation with your questions or comments for Margaret by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. And later in the hour, we'll visit with National Geographic photographer Keely Yuyen about his new photography book called Guardians of Life. So right now, Margaret Pearce is joining us from Rockland, Maine. She's a photographer and a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. Hi, Margaret. Welcome to Native America Calling, and please further introduce yourself.
Thanks so much. Bojo Jayek, Makoskwe, and Dejnikas, Bodwe Wadmin Dao, Shishibeniok, Nudabendagwis, Mako, Owen Dodam. Chimigwech, thanks so much, Andy, for inviting me to be a guest on this show. I am so excited to be here and really looking forward to our conversation.
All right. Well, it's very exciting to have you on our show as well. And just in the intro, I mentioned your current project, Mississippi Dialogues. Tell us a little bit about that and where in this process you are.
Sure. Mississippi Dialogues is a public art project to create an indigenized map of the Mississippi River from mouth to headwaters to clearly portray the Mississippi River as relative. And we are launching this project this year as a collaboration with Prairie Island Indian Community, Tippo, Ho-Chunk Nation, Tippo, and citizens from Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and with partners at the Anderson Center in Red Wing, Minnesota, and Joe Davis Conservation Foundation in Galena, Illinois, for a stretch of the river between Hastings, Minnesota on the north and Galena, Illinois on the south. So we're working on about 200 miles of the river to launch the project. Wow. So we started, it's a small piece of the river, but it feels huge. Mm-hmm. We started with a series of interviews with tribal citizens to asking people to speak about their knowledge and experience of the river, growing up on the river, as a way of creating an archive for each nation, for their community, to have as an archive about the river. And then meanwhile, as a cartographer, I have been working up maps of the river working from the Mississippi River Commission series, which some of your listeners might know. This was a series that was created at the turn of the century, about 1890s, that portrays the river. There was still a lot of human structures on that river at that time, a lot of paved structures, but it precedes all of the major Army Corps projects of the 20th century. So the river is still mostly a sponge in those maps, and we can see the flooded forests and those sandbars and the islands that are not visible now. So into that spongy river, I've been interleaving our traditional place names or their traditional place names of my collaborators. And then I'll begin adding selections from that interview archive that we've been collaboratively building. Right. So these are large maps. They're about 7.5 feet long by 5 feet high. We're still in the design process. That'll be continuing through the spring and summer. And then by fall, we'll be mounting them on wood and pairing them with artwork by indigenous wood artists. That's Ben Spears and Cloris Lowe making the wood artworks for those structures. Okay. And they'll be installed in public places, in public parks in Red Wing, and at a nature preserve in Galena, Illinois, at Casper Bluff.
All right. So it's a public art project. Why does this project work for, why go the public art route for this project?
Yeah, such a good question. I think that, so in one answer to that is that the work I've been doing has been getting larger over time, and I've become more and more interested in understanding how the size of the map can express to visitors or readers of that map when it's more like body size for people. So at one level, it's about making something large, and it's also about placing those works in conversation with the river. So the maps I make, I really work hard to make them contemplative spaces so that readers can slow down and think through the narrative on their own time, working through that narrative, following their own path, trying to give them lots of freedom in the space of the composition. But also now it's kind of the next natural step to place those works in proximity to the river who we are ruminating about, so that visitors can be in conversation with the river at the same time they're contemplating the map.
Okay. What would you say to what most people think about maps, that they're supposed to maybe look a certain way and tell a certain kind of story? I mean, are maps obligated to tell a specific story, or must contain, X, Y, and Z?
Mapping is such a wide open field, and just like writing, they're not inherently obligated to do anything. They're whatever authors bring to them. In my practice, I love the potential for maps to bring so much to the table regarding, especially because I work in print, they bring so much to the table regarding a wide angle on the world and the context, the wider context of a narrative. I love how they communicate through the sizes and shapes of symbols. Those also tell us so much. So I think when there can be public perceptions that a map must look a particular way, if you begin to re-examine those ideas by thinking of maps as creative expression, or the way I see them as a particular kind of expression, as writing, then maybe you'll bring new expectations or different expectations to what a map can do in the world and what a map can be and what it can look like.
Okay. All right. We have about a little more than a minute before we go to our first break here, but I want to start off this question here. What are some of these maps, especially maps where you're working with Indigenous people, what are they challenging? What are they pushing back against?
I would say that each project is pushing back in a different way. It really depends on the purpose of that project. And when I'm working with collaborators, listening to what they say is what's missing in the way that society perceives their nations, or what's missing in outsiders' understandings of their ways of life. And so every project is about listening to that and then looking for a way to address that in the map, so in a way that can be widely understood.
Okay. All right. We are talking with cartographer Margaret Pearce today about her work in map making. She's challenging a lot of what's been known about a place, about how people interact with the place through the art and conversation of map making. If this is something you're interested in, or you have a question about, you can give us a call and take part in our conversation. We're at 1-800-996-2848. Inupiaq leaders are gathering at the Arctic Encounter Summit in Anchorage to chart their economic future in the wake of President Trump's renewed efforts to expand oil drilling in the Arctic. Some welcome the economic boost and others remain wary. We'll hear from tribal leaders and others on the next Native America Calling, live from the summit.
Who protects Indian country? Amerind does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerind helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerind is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
You're listening to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy, and we're talking with cartographer Margaret Pearce today. Her work depicts Indigenous perspectives of a place and challenges mainstream map making and place names. You can join our conversation by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's 1-800-99-NATIVE. Margaret, just before the break, I asked what some of your maps and what your work is challenging. And, it challenges this history of being excluded. How has being, I guess, historically excluded from cartography, how has it affected Native people and the other people's understanding of Native people here?
Absolutely. I'll pick right up where we left off with an example. I had the privilege to work on another collaboration about removal, about Ho-Chunk and Miami-Yaqui removals from their homelands in Wisconsin and Indiana, respectively, for an installation at the Field Museum. And this is a permanent exhibition, so our listeners can go see that. It's in the Native North America wing. Anyway, when I first started working on the Ho-Chunk removals, I had the privilege to work with Bill Quackenbush, who's the Ho-Chunk Nation Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. And in the beginning, when he was starting to tell his removal stories, he just blurted out. He was so frustrated, and he said, you know, people don't take the time to learn our stories. And he said, they talk about us. They say, oh, Ho-Chunks went here and there. You know, they were always nomadic. And then he says very strongly, we were never nomadic. We never wanted to leave. We always wanted to stay. And then he goes on to say how that dismissal of their stories, the truth about their expulsion from their homelands, and that the fabrication of a fiction about why they weren't there, that those are at the root of the rationalization for their continued colonization and racism against them. And so that was the framework, like those, when he said those, when he shared that, it then became the opening to the map, the opening lines, and the rest of the map kind of fell into place from there. So I feel like that, to me, that's a powerful example of the ways that because of the lack of maps, and now as we're seeing the removal of the censorship of public history that we're experiencing now, it has an effect on people's understandings and awareness of Indigenous ways of life.
Right. By doing research for this show, I read a chapter of a book called Mapping the Unmappable. It was a chapter that you wrote, and you mentioned being commissioned to create a map for a celebration. Samuel de Champlain was being celebrated for, you know, his founding of Quebec. And you were commissioned to create a map. And in reading his journals, you learned a lot more about his perspective and about the perspective of land and Indigenous people at the time. And you wrote that you had an obligation to intervene. What did you mean by that?
So it wasn't just me. This was a co-authored map with Mike Herman through the Canadian American Center at University of Maine, and we felt like he just goes on and on about himself. I mean, the diaries, they're also about fundraising for his next trip, so he is definitely trying to make himself look good for the funders. But a map has spaces, and that has the potential to insert responses to somebody's words. So the project was to map his, in his words, about his travels and what he was up to, trying to manipulate different tribes to take him to the Great Sea, the Northwest Passage. No one ever takes him there because they can see exactly what he's up to, and there are other political priorities in place. So the intervention came from reading more widely on history and oral histories at that time, and creating first-person Indigenous voices to speak back to what Champlain was stating was true, which was really fun. It was very, it's a playful map, and and it was really fun to use the opportunity of the spaces of the composition to sneak those responses in.
Okay, and it seems like there's a lot of responsibility in translating these stories here. Tell me a little bit about your responsibility as a cartographer. How do you make decisions on what to include and what to leave out? Because I imagine there are so many stories that maybe can't possibly fit in a map, no matter how large the paper is.
It's so true. And that's one of the things that is always exciting to me about cartography. It's just like writing when you start out and there's so much you want to say, and then you revise down, and you revise down, and as you revise to clarify or to fit in the space of whatever the format is that you're creating for, you really get to the heart of what you want to say. And sometimes, I mean, it depends on the project, but to go back to the removals project, for that, we had months of interviews, and then I put together a draft narrative and then shared it back with my collaborators, and then for their edits, and then I storyboarded, and then we looked at the storyboards together. And this was during COVID, and it was the first time that I had ever interacted. Like, usually when I'm working on a map, we're looking at the map together, like on my monitor. But this time, because of video conferencing, we're looking like they see. In this case, it's Diane Hunter, Bill Quackenbush, Josie Lee. They see the map that I am at the way that I see it, and so then they're revising on the screen with me. So I love that. I love collaborative revising. It's literally like creating a clear narrative for whatever the format is going to be, and who you're speaking with, rather than trying to cram everything in. I think there's an idea out there that maps must contain everything and you need to cram it all in. But of course, it's a narrative in a compositional space, and you just go into it that way.
Okay. You also took on a project where you talked to maybe hundreds of tribes across Canada to get traditional place names to put on a map, you described, you sometimes you can't reach a tribe or get a language translation, and you got a lot of questions and maybe even some pushback from your peers on taking on this huge task of talking to every tribe across Canada to get these place names. How does that, when the translation isn't there, you can't reach a person, or maybe there's protected knowledge that Native people don't want to put out there. How does that complicate a project, or how does that manifest itself on a map?
Yeah, I went into that project thinking I'll just reach out to people and call people, and whoever wants to participate, then I'll just start bringing their names into the map, and it'll be through whoever wants to participate. And that said, I think that maybe there's upwards of maybe 230 people and organizations who decided to contribute names to that project. But that's after maybe half of the people that I worked out to, or that I reached out to, said no. So that gives you an idea of how many cold calls I was making, where people either said no, or all the ways that people say no, either very clearly or more politely and indirectly. because of course they don't know me and they don't know what's going to happen to that project and what the life of it will be. So just went step by step. And it wasn't so clear. I mean, for me, it was a huge education for all the spectrum of ways that people may or may not want to share cultural property. So I make it very clear in the map that place names are cultural property and that they appear by permission. But those permissions are completely different by nation, by First Nation, by Métis community, by Inuit. And I try to make that clear in the map by simply bringing in the names as they were shared. So, for example, some names appear with an English explanation attached to them. Some names appear by themselves, no English explanation. And nowhere in the map do I say, some names don't have an English explanation. That's for you to observe and to think about why they stand by themselves. There are some names that are, I think that they were translated in a way that pushed back at the request for a translation. So I'm guessing that they're there as a pushback, and so I include that pushback there, because all of that is teaching me and teaching all the other readers of the wide diversity of our nations and the wide diversity of what protecting cultural property looks like and what permissions look like.
Okay. How have you seen your work change over time, or maybe, I guess, the mission you bring to a project? How do you think that's changed for you over time?
That's a good question. I feel like increasingly like that I'm not choosing projects. I feel like the projects are choosing me. I'm not really sure. I'm literally one project comes from the last one. They're like stepping stones to each other. For sure, the maps have been getting larger. I don't know that that's going to continue. I've also, for some reason, I'm starting to work more in pairs of maps. So creating two maps that are intended to be contemplated side by side, and not always for the same reason. So this began at more of a functional level with translating for Champlain, English side and French side, and the Penobscot place names, Penobscot side and English side. But then for removals, for that project, the commission was to create a map about removal. But I did not want to make one map about one tribe's removal. I wanted people to understand the diversity of all the removals. So it became two maps side by side, which I thought would then, or I hope will then open up in visitors' minds, oh, there are many removals, and we can also, for Indigenous visitors, there's space in those maps for them to also tell their stories. Okay. So the two maps create that space. And then in the project I just finished, The Cold at Inuit Nunangat, again, that's two maps side by side. And one map is about portraying clearly what balance looks like through protecting the cold, through the ways that Inuit and their relatives protect the cold on their homelands. And the other map is about clearly portraying the ways we Southerners, as they call us, are interfering with that balance through our carbon emissions. And so those maps are side by side so that there's a clear picture of balance and a clear picture of harm. and not to let them into the same composition, but to be contemplated together.
Okay. All right, we have about a minute before our next break here, but I'd like to ask about the art aspect of cartography. I mean, there's graphic design, there's typography. I mean, what goes into, I guess, the aesthetic and the art that is included in your work?
Oh, thank you so much for asking that. If any maps you see, if you start to think about how much typography is affecting the way that the image that you are creating in your mind about that place, so much of it comes from typography because there's so many words on maps. And so the typefaces that we choose and the way that we place them, cartographers think of them as symbols themselves, not as labels the way someone might think of them, but literally as symbols because they themselves are carrying voice and they express the landscape through the way that they're laid on the map.
All right. All right, we're going to go to a break just now, and if you'd like to contribute to this conversation, you can join us by calling 1-800-996-2848.
Tribal Development Partners believe strong infrastructure strengthens tribal sovereignty. Through the 105L lease program, TDP helps align federal funding systems with long-term tribal priorities. More at tribaldevpartners.com. Proud to support this show.
Kaufman & Associates has over 35 years of experience serving Indian country, supporting growth, transformation, and sustainability of tribal programs. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
Thank you for tuning in to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy, sitting in for Sean Spruce. And before we move on to our next segment here with another guest, I want to go back to Margaret Pearce, our April Native in the Spotlight. She's a cartographer, and she does a whole bunch of wonderful work. I just wish this hour was maybe 2-3 hours so we could learn more about map making. But Margaret, I'd like to ask, how have you seen your maps impact Native people? How have you seen maybe your maps spark a different kind of understanding for Native people and non-Native people?
I don't always know what people are thinking, and that's fine. You know, when we put the work out in the world, then it has its own life, and sometimes it's really not really any of my business, like what people are doing with it, and that's fine. We don't, I don't survey what people are doing with it. Sometimes people do tell me, which is amazing. You know, sometimes people write to me and they say, I used your map in my class, and this led to this activity outside where we did this art project. So sometimes people tell me amazing things that they're doing with students. I would say that the project that I know the most about in terms of impacts is the Land Grab Universities project, which I had the opportunity to collaborate on with Bobby Lee and Tristan Atone and Kaylin Goodluck for High Country News, where we were doing the investigation of the ways that land-grant universities benefited from the Morrill Act when Congress basically gave land-grant universities free indigenous lands for them to then play on the market for the profits that established the principles of their endowments. And that's an online project that remains live today. And there have been many follow-up projects, one through that came out of our team that's now at GRIST for their Misplaced Trust project, following up on the climate impacts of the Moral Act, but also the ways that students at many universities picked up this data set that we put out there and ran with it and did their own investigations and worked for change in their own universities regarding resources for Indigenous students and Indigenous faculty and staff. So that's been really exciting for me to witness.
Awesome. All right. Well, Margaret, thank you so much for joining us today. You can continue the conversation about Margaret and her work, or maybe even ask further questions. You can go to our website, nativeamericacalling.com. We're also on social media if you'd like to chime in and add your thoughts to this conversation here. So I want to move on to our last segment here with Keely Yu Yen. His photography book, Guardians of Life, Indigenous Science, Indigenous Wisdom, and Restoring the Planet is out this month. Keely is joining us now from Seattle, Washington. He's a photographer and a National Geographic explorer. He's Nanai Huju, and I want to welcome him to Native America Calling. Welcome, Keely.
Hi, Bachaguapu. It's nice to be here.
Thank you for joining. So I got a chance to look at your photography book, and it's very, very beautiful, of course. And I'd like to ask a question that I think will help readers understand where this book could, take them and where it's taken you. You describe, a chain of epiphanies that moved you to live and learn with Indigenous people throughout the world. What do you mean by that, and how is this book a response to those epiphanies you experienced?
Going out on an assignment as a photographer, even before that, I've been a traditional kayak builder for most of my life, for about 20 years, and then I became a photographer as well. And so it was going out to a lot of Indigenous communities, because that's also where I feel very comfortable. But as I started to work around the world in different communities and seeing how Indigenous peoples were, with what everyone was up to in their own places, one of the things I started to notice is that every time I go someplace, it'd be some of the most beautiful land or the most beautiful sea with all these unusual animals and things living there. And so I started to put two and two together and was like, wait a minute. Why is it that all of these most amazing, beautiful places are places that have Indigenous people living in them? Because we're told that human beings, whenever they live someplace, destroy their place. That's sort of the dominant thing that you hear all the time. Like, people are worried that, or they sort of think of themselves like human beings as the worst species that will destroy everything else. And what I started to see very quickly was that actually is definitely not the case. In fact, the most beautiful places are the places that are taken care of very well because of the people that live in them. So that's kind of what the book is about.
All right. And you start off in Alaska, and then we end in Vancouver Island. Tell me about some of these different landscapes and different communities you visit that are portrayed in your book.
Yeah, I tried to go to as many different places that are, that's widespread around the world. So we're looking at the Pacific, the Oceania, like in Palau, where they have a shark sanctuary, giant marine protected area, to Greenland, where they are hunting narwhals but are very careful to manage the populations of all of their wildlife closely. To places like the Klamath in California, where we just had the world's largest dam removal thanks to the efforts of all the peoples on the Klamath. So pretty cool stuff. But all of it works differently, but at the same time, it's very easy to see once you look at all of these different places together that it's not a fluke. It's not like just one place where one people is doing this neat thing here, but actually it's a movement.
Right. Speaking of the Klamath, we spoke yesterday and you mentioned a photo that really sort of summed up the theme of the book, or sort of was like a highlight that you'd like to talk about today. Tell me about that photo, the one where Lisa Moorhead Hillman and Leif Hillman from the Karuk tribe are celebrating on the Klamath River in California?
Yeah, in California. It's a beautiful image. So I took, or rather, Lisa took me to the Klamath just downstream from one of the dams that had been removed, and it had been their first time being down there since the water had receded and it started to return to looking like a natural river again. And you could just smell it when we got down there. You could smell that the river smelled like a wild river again, instead of that kind of boiling algae grossness that it was before when the dams were up. And they were so happy just to be down there in that river. And when I had them, I was like, hey, let's take a picture on this river with you guys, because this is a testament to your success and your hard work. And so they went down there, took the shoes off, and were standing around in the water. And then they were just having such a great time that when I took a picture, it was Lisa kissing her husband, Leif, celebrating this moment of the river returning to what it looked like 150 years prior, which was, a marvelous situation. And, one of the things that I really love about it is, Leif and Lisa also wrote the epilogue, or one of the epilogues. They did an interview with me and my publisher, and to talk about what happened in the dam removal. And Leif told me a story that I really like. And he said basically, at the end, when the dams had come down, all of the agencies, both the state agencies, the federal agencies, the Secretary of the Interior, came down and they asked Leif to lead a tour of the river at the dam sites where they had been removed. And so they get down there to the dam site, and there's 20 some agency heads standing there, and one of them comes up to Leif and says, Hey, we did it. We brought this dam down. And Leif, in his mind, he's like, I remember you. I remember you when 20 years ago, when you fought us bitterly and said that this was impossible, that there was no way that you could remove a dam, and that it was a pipe dream. But he didn't say anything because, this is just Leif mumbling under his breath. But they went up and they toured the dam sites, and by the end, people were crying. They were in tears because of how beautiful the river was. And Leif thought to himself, gosh, there's all these people here that are now taking credit for this thing, but a lot of them fought us and said that it wasn't possible. But here they are in tears, and we're crying about the same thing, to see the river come back. And it was because of indigenous leadership that made it possible. It is through the combination of sovereignty, leadership, and persistence, indigenous persistence, that made it possible. And I thought, what a better story to encapsulate what Guardians of Life is all about.
Right. How did you make connections with, folks like Lisa and Leif and, the dozens of other folks who are featured in the book?
When we started working on this project, one of the criterion I developed for places to go, we were looking for places to have a good geographic spread, but ultimately one of the big decisions was to make sure that I had a personal connection within 2 degrees of separation to one of the communities, so that I'd always be going in and be introduced by somebody. Because, Native communities, we like to trust people that we know, that we can see. And so having 2 degrees of separation made it a lot easier. So someone could introduce me, or I knew someone in that community already, and so could go in and talk to them as a community and make sure that there was a formal welcome, and that we were going about this in the right, proper, and respectful way, rather than just sort of appearing in the community, doing a story and then vanishing again. And of course now people from lots of these communities have become dear friends, and so now that sort of has expanded my network in a way where people continue coming to me with ideas about things that they want to work on or messages that they want to deliver to the world. So it's wonderful to be part of that collaborative effort.
Right. And I imagine visiting some of these places also presented some dangerous situations. In the bio at the back of the book, you mentioned you survived being stalked by a polar bear. What kind of sacrifices did you have to make to get some of these photos and tell some of these stories?
I don't know if I would say they're sacrifices per se. I certainly I feel like I get more out of it than I give. But honestly, there is a lot of dangerous situations that I end up in. And the thing I always try to realize is, like, if we're facing down a polar bear, or diving under the sea ice, and there's these, or I'm in the Amazon and it's really hot and there's all kinds of creatures trying to bite me, eat me, mate with me, whatever it is, that it's actually dangerous for me, but that's because it's not home for me. And for everybody else that is around me, it's their home. So it's just like, seeing a poisonous spider or something like that. It's just like, oh yeah, that's Fred or whatever, like that's someone we know. That spider is a friend to us, and we know it because we're in our home. And so I always try to remember that. And that's one of the things that's wonderful when I am in a new environment, but I'm hanging out with people for whom that is home. It very quickly starts to feel like a place that isn't foreign to me, but like I'm sort of a guest in another person's home, and I'm not worried about being harmed. I just try to keep my wits about me, as it were, so I don't do something stupid. But as long as I'm around other people that are in that environment, then I feel very safe.
Right. I imagine, you have these memory cards full of thousands and thousands of photos. What makes a good photo, and how do you choose what to publish for this book or other storytelling projects?
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing about a photo, above all other things, is that it makes someone feel something. So a photograph, it can contain a lot of information. It could be evidence that maybe a court would look at or something like that. And people kind of think that's what a photograph is. But the most powerful photographs are definitely the photographs that make us feel something. They grab you and force you to look at them because they say, like, oh my God, look at this thing. How do you feel about this polar bear staring you right in the face, or this sea snake, or this person, this elder that is passing down a knowledge to the youth about how to spin coconut fiber ropes? We see those things and immediately you feel something, and so that is what makes it powerful. And if there's a story inside of it too, that's the next layer. So you make someone feel something, and then you tell them a story. And hopefully that photograph is able to pass on a lot of information that you just couldn't do with words. It would be very difficult to do with words. I think a lot of what makes Guardians of Life, the photographs in Guardians of Life, powerful is because, in the conservation world, there's lots of people who already understand that indigenous peoples are the world's best stewards, protectors, right? But a lot of times I feel like conservationists are sort of ticking off boxes. They're like, oh yeah, we know that we need to consult indigenous peoples, but they don't really understand it in their heart. They don't understand it in their mind, but they don't understand it in their heart. When you look at the photographs, people get it. They see this elder teaching the kids how to do something, and they feel that in their heart, and that is what makes it work.
All right. Well, that is the end of the time we have for today. I'd like to say thank you so much to our guests who joined us today, Margaret Pearce and Keely Yu-Yan. Keely's book is called Guardians of Life: Indigenous Knowledge, Indigenous Science, and Restoring the Planet. You can find more information about these folks on our website, nativeamericacalling.com.
colleges and universities support their students in countless ways. They say I believe and offer help before it's asked.
Hear that?
Fully embrace.
That's everything tribal college faculty do for their students on Fast Forward. Because if one tried to say it in real time, they'd be here all day. They teach, guide, comfort, and connect. And for that, the community is grateful. Learn more at mostthoroughdjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
They give extensions, cheer progress, share laughter, create calm, and allow reflection. They inspire hope, share wisdom, guide gently, validate feelings.
Who protects Indian country? Amerind does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerind helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerind is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.